Picture the scene. The lights are low. The cake is coming out. Everyone in the room has already started singing, slightly out of tune, slightly too loud, because that is how group singing always goes. The candles are lit, the birthday person is leaning forward, and there is that one moment, that exact moment where every person in the room is holding their breath, when someone else lunges forward and blows. Not the birthday person, someone else. A child, usually. Sometimes a sibling. Occasionally a grown adult who really should know better and does it anyway with a grin that says they are absolutely not sorry. And here is what is interesting. Nobody is surprised. The birthday person might be mildly annoyed. Everyone else laughs. And within about 30 seconds, the whole thing has become part of the story of that birthday, filed away as a memory that will be brought up at future birthdays for years. Because this happens at almost every birthday, in almost every culture that does the candle thing. And nobody ever stops to ask why. Why does someone always want to blow out candles that are not theirs? Why does everyone sing that specific song? Why do people smash faces into cakes? Why do birthdays make people emotional in ways that are hard to fully explain? The answers have a lot less to do with candles and cakes than you might think, and a lot more to do with some genuinely fascinating territory in human psychology, social behavior, and evolutionary neuroscience. So let us start at the beginning, which, in this case, goes back a very long time. Subscribe to Freud Mind, and let us get into the strange psychology of birthdays. Birthdays as a concept are older than most people realize, and the history of how they evolved from a royal privilege to a universal human celebration is worth a quick look before we get into the psychology, because the history explains a lot about why the modern birthday looks the way it does. The earliest recorded birthday celebrations belong to the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. When a pharaoh was crowned, they were considered to be transformed into a god, and that transformation date, not their physical birth date, was treated as their birthday. The celebration was an acknowledgement of divine status, not personal sentiment. It was political, religious, and reserved for the very few people considered godlike enough to deserve it. The average Egyptian was not getting a cake and a song. The average Egyptian was the one baking the cake and doing the singing. The ancient Greeks added something new to the tradition: candles. They placed lit candles on round cakes offered to Artemis, the goddess of the moon, to make the cakes glow like moonlight and to symbolize a tribute rising upward. The smoke, they believed, carried prayers toward the gods. This is where the idea of smoke-carrying wishes comes from, a belief that has traveled through millennia and is still echoing every time someone closes their eyes and makes a birthday wish before blowing out candles in a suburban kitchen in the 21st century. The Romans were the first civilization to celebrate birthdays for ordinary citizens, not just royals and gods, but regular people. Roman men received public holidays on their birthdays, and friends and family would gather with gifts, food, and celebration. Women's birthdays were not celebrated publicly until much later, which tells you a great deal about Roman social priorities. But the basic structure of gathering around someone to acknowledge the anniversary of their birth was established here. Birthdays as we currently know them, cake, candles, singing, gifts, the whole package, became a widespread civilian tradition in Germany during the 18th century, where children's birthday celebrations called Kinderfest were a genuine cultural phenomenon. The tradition spread through Europe and then globally, carried partly by German immigrants, and partly because the structure of the celebration turned out to be deeply appealing across cultures. Something about the ritual of marking time, gathering people, and placing one person at the center of collective attention resonated everywhere it arrived. By the 20th century, the birthday party was a near-universal human experience. But birthdays did not just create traditions. They created behaviors. And the behaviors are where things get genuinely interesting. Back to the candles. Someone always tries to blow them out. The most common culprit is a young child, which is not a coincidence. Understanding why children do this requires understanding something about how the child brain processes exciting events and the role of mirror neurons in human behavior. Mirror neurons are cells in the brain that activate both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform that same action. They are the neurological foundation of imitation. The reason watching someone yawn makes you want to yawn. The reason watching someone eat something delicious makes your mouth water. And the reason that when a child watches someone blow out birthday candles, their brain is partially simulating the action of blowing out candles themselves. The neural pattern for the action is being activated by observation. The body wants to complete what the brain has already started rehearsing. For young children, this effect is stronger than in adults for two reasons. First, children are in an active phase of learning through imitation. They are evolutionarily primed to copy the actions of others as a primary learning strategy, so the impulse to imitate exciting actions is particularly strong. Second, children do not yet have a fully developed understanding of social ownership of rituals. The concept that this particular blowing out of candles belongs to this particular person in a way that excludes everyone else is a social abstraction that requires theory of mind development that young children are still building. From a young child's perspective, there are candles. There is an exciting action to be performed, and they are present and capable of performing it. The missing piece, the understanding that the ritual belongs to someone else, is simply not fully there yet. There is also the matter of timing. The candle-blowing moment is the climax of the birthday party. Everything, the singing, the gathering, the darkened room, the lit candles, has been building toward this one moment. For everyone in the room, this is the emotional peak, the resolution of a sequence that has been building anticipation. The moment is charged with excitement. And excitement, particularly in children, creates an almost irresistible impulse to act. The brain is flooded with the anticipation of the reward moment, and staying passive in the face of that anticipation requires a degree of impulse control that young nervous systems are not yet equipped to exercise. This is essentially FOMO, fear of missing out, in its most neurologically pure form. Not the social media version of FOMO, but the original human experience of being present for something exciting and feeling an almost physical pull toward participation in it rather than observation of it. The child is not trying to ruin the birthday. The child is responding to one of the most basic human drives, the drive to participate, to be part of the action, to be in the moment rather than watching it happen to someone else. Now, about the adults who do it. Because while the child psychology is straightforward, the adult who lunges for the candles is doing something slightly different and arguably more psychologically interesting. Adults who blow out someone else's candles are almost always doing it within a specific social context. They are close to the birthday person, the atmosphere is playful, and there is an implicit understanding that the transgression will be received as affection rather than aggression. What they are actually demonstrating is something called playful dominance, a social behavior that signals intimacy and comfort. You only do embarrassing things to people you are genuinely close to. The joke only works if the relationship can hold it. In this sense, the candle blowing is less about the candles and more about the relationship, a performance of closeness that says we are intimate enough that I can do something slightly annoying to you, and we will both know it is love. There is also an attention component. The birthday person is, for this moment, the center of all attention in the room. The candle blower inserts themselves into that moment, briefly sharing the spotlight. The face in the cake tradition deserves its own conversation because it is one of those behaviors that looks inexplicable until you understand what it is actually doing socially. Smashing someone's face into a birthday cake is a behavior that operates on the logic of playful dominance and in-group signaling. The implicit message of the act is that we are close enough that I can humiliate you in a harmless way, and you know it comes from a place of affection. It is the same logic as a gentle shove between friends, or the kinds of teasing that only work between people who trust each other. The social risk of the act, the potential for it to land badly, is precisely what makes it an effective signal of closeness when it does land well. You are taking a small social gamble that the relationship can hold the embarrassment, and the act of taking that gamble demonstrates how confident you are in the relationship. The internet amplified this behavior significantly. The face-in-cake moment is photogenic, shareable, and reliably generates a reaction, which means it became a type of content before people consciously thought of it that way. Seeing it happen in videos made it feel more expected, more normal, more like something that should happen at birthdays, rather than something that occasionally happened. The social script around birthdays quietly absorbed it. For the people who hate it, and there are many, the psychology is equally clear. Having your face unexpectedly pushed into a cake is a loss of bodily autonomy in a public setting. It is sudden, it is involuntary, and it involves your face, one of the most socially and psychologically significant parts of the body, being used as a prop in someone else's joke. Some people find this deeply uncomfortable, regardless of how close the relationship is. And practically speaking, professional bakers increasingly warn that modern tiered cakes contain internal structural supports, wooden dowels, metal rods, that make the face push genuinely dangerous. The gap between the social joke and the physical reality of the object is something participants rarely consider in the moment. Now to the song. Why does every birthday involve group singing? And why that song? Happy Birthday to You was not always the birthday song. The melody originated in a song called Good Morning to All, written by sisters Patty and Mildred Hill in 1893 as a classroom greeting. The birthday lyrics were adapted sometime afterward and spread rapidly through the early 20th century. For most of the 20th century, the song was technically under copyright, owned by a series of music publishers, which meant that using it in commercially released films and television productions technically required a licensing fee. A 2016 legal ruling determined that the copyright claim was invalid and the song entered the public domain. But by that point, it had already been the universal birthday song for a century. Singing together with a group produces social bonding through several mechanisms simultaneously. It synchronizes breathing and body movement across multiple people, creating a form of physiological alignment that is associated with increased feelings of connection. It requires shared attention, everyone attending to the same thing at the same time, which creates a sense of collective presence. And it produces endorphins in the singers, which is part of why singing in groups tends to feel good, even when you are not a good singer and know it. The song functions as a bonding ritual rather than a musical performance, which is why nobody cares that it is sung badly. The point was never the music. The wish is one of the most psychologically interesting parts of the birthday ritual, partly because it is taken so seriously by children and treated as genuinely meaningful by a surprising number of adults who would describe themselves as rational and non-superstitious. The tradition of making a wish on birthday candles connects directly to the ancient Greek belief that smoke carries prayers toward the divine. Blow out the candles, make a wish, the smoke carries it upward. The instruction to keep the wish secret adds an additional psychological layer. Wishes told are wishes invalidated, according to the social rule, which means the wishmaker is holding a private intention that exists only in their mind, surrounded by a social ritual that treats that private intention as real and significant. Modern psychology has a clear explanation for why this matters beyond superstition. The act of formulating a wish requires you to identify what you want, to move from a vague sense of desire to a specific articulated intention. Research on implementation intentions and goal formation suggests that the act of concretely identifying a desired outcome increases the likelihood of taking action toward it, even when the wishing ritual itself has no causal power. Making a birthday wish is, in a functional sense, a moment of personal intention setting, dressed in a costume of magic. And intention setting, even dressed in a costume, tends to produce real psychological effects on mood, motivation, and focus. Birthdays make people emotional in ways that are disproportionate to the event itself. Turning a year older is not inherently significant. One day to the next contains no meaningful biological change. And yet, birthdays reliably produce reflection, nostalgia, and in many cases a low-grade existential unease that is hard to fully explain in the moment. The explanation lies partly in something psychologists call the fresh start effect, the documented tendency of humans to treat certain temporal landmarks as psychological reset points. New years, new months, new weeks, and birthdays function as mental dividers between the old self and the new self, between the previous chapter and the one beginning now. The arbitrary nature of the landmark does not reduce its psychological power. The brain is genuinely affected by the framing, and the birthday provides a moment of reflection and forward projection that most ordinary days do not carry. Birthdays also invite comparison in a way that can be uncomfortable. The question of whether you are where you expected to be by this age, whether the life being lived matches the life that was imagined, whether the year just passed contained what it should have. These are not questions most people ask on random Tuesdays. Birthdays bring them to the surface. This is why birthdays can feel heavy even when everything is going well, and why people who are not bothered by aging can still feel strange on their birthday without quite being able to articulate why. The attention itself is part of the emotional weight. For most people, most days, nobody is organizing a gathering specifically in their honor. A birthday concentrates social energy on one person in a way that is unusual and can feel unfamiliar. Being the focus of collective attention, love, and celebration is genuinely moving, and for some people, uncomfortable, precisely because it does not happen very often. Birthday surprises work, because surprise is one of the most powerful memory formation mechanisms the brain has. Unexpected positive events are encoded more strongly than expected ones. The brain flags surprise as significant, releases a stronger dopamine response, and commits the associated memory with greater clarity and emotional detail. This is why people remember surprise parties years later with vivid specificity, while the details of expected birthday dinners blur together. The surprise is not just emotionally pleasing in the moment. It creates a more durable and significant memory than the equivalent expected event would produce. Organizing a surprise also serves a social signaling function for the organizers. Planning a surprise requires effort, coordination, and sustained attention to another person, all of which communicate that the birthday person is important enough to merit that level of investment. The surprise is a gift of attention and organization that says you matter enough that we worked for this. Birthdays are one of the few genuinely universal human celebrations, and the variety of traditions across cultures is a reminder that the specific rituals are less important than the underlying impulse they all serve. In some Latin American countries, the birthday person is pulled by the ear once for each year of life. In the UK and Commonwealth countries, the birthday person is lifted and bumped on the ground the same number of times. In Canada and parts of Ireland, having your nose buttered on your birthday is supposed to make you too slippery for bad luck to grab you. In many Asian cultures, long noodles are eaten on birthdays, uncut, to symbolize a long life. Piñatas, originating in Mexico but now widespread, combine the physical excitement of whacking something with the reward of what falls out. In Denmark, flags are placed outside windows to announce that someone in the house is celebrating a birthday. What all of these traditions share, despite their differences, is the same underlying function. They mark the day as different from other days. They involve other people, which means they are fundamentally social, not personal. And they center one individual in the attention and energy of a group. The specific ritual does not matter as much as the fact that a ritual exists, because the ritual is what creates the psychological experience of the day as significant. So here is where it all lands. A birthday is not really about cake. It is not really about candles, or the song, or the wish, or the face in the frosting. A birthday is one of the very few occasions where an entire group of people agrees, simultaneously and explicitly, to direct their collective attention toward a single individual. That is what makes it emotionally powerful. That is what makes traditions stick. Jokes go further than they would any other day. And why someone, even knowing they should not, still feels the urge to lean forward and blow out candles that are not theirs. Because in that moment, when the candles are lit and every person in the room is holding their breath and watching, even for just a second, even just a little, everyone wants to be the one in the center of all of that. Like and subscribe to Freud Mind for more.